Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure tonight to host you on a single topic, and we're going to be talking around the Modi docket and international war crimes. So, this is not a special broadcast, it is a broadcast of Talking Point that you're very well acquainted with. But tonight I'm sitting in for the host. I'm joined by two very, very special guests and well known attorney Yusha Tayeb and our guest all the way from the UK, Muzammil Ayub Thakur. Now, this is an incredibly interesting topic. Why? Because we're going to be talking about international arrest warrant, how it fits in the domestic legislation, what it really means to say that you're going to arrest an international war criminal, what mechanisms are employed locally, how does it work. So without further ado, I hand over the introduction to this topic to Yusha Tayeb, who's been very, very involved in the latest docket. Yusha, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you and the listeners. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, Ashraf, we in essence rely on the implementation of the Rome Statute, which of the International Criminal Court. So, post 94, South Africa became part of the world, and a lot of the legislation that it adopted was consonant with the atrocities that South Africans had to suffer throughout the years, and mindful of that, the South African government implemented the act. In its easiest format to explain it to you, because we're going to be dealing with what I call war crimes and crimes against humanity. If, for instance, someone was a victim of a crime, murder, rape, theft, whatever it was, housebreaking, one would report that to the police. The police would then open a docket, assign a docket number to it, conduct investigations, gather evidence, present it to the prosecutor, hopefully find a perpetrator. Once the perpetrator was then caught, it would follow its procedure in terms of charging that person, taking that person through a prosecution, and hopefully securing a conviction and a sentence. What the Rome Statute does is it expands it to an international level. So it speaks specifically about people in power, prime ministers, presidents, heads of state, who are guilty of these kinds of atrocities. And so what it does is it creates a mechanism through which you identify a victim, and that victim testifies as to war crimes and crimes against humanity. And what that act allows you to do is if that perpetrator happens to be on South African soil, you're entitled to bring charges against such person. And that's exactly what we've done here. We started this process in 2018 when Modi was scheduled to arrive in South Africa. Our NDPP, we referred the complaint to them. They in turn appointed an investigating officer from the DPCI, the directorate. It's the big league of the police.
The Hawks.
The Hawks.
Yeah.
And they, the greatest start was that they opened the docket. They saw grounds on which there was a docket. So we were assigned a case number. We were given an investigating officer, and the investigation continued. In the course of the investigation, we indicated to them, and I'm sure Muzammil will deal with it, we had substantial difficulty in getting victims because the Indian intelligence, Indian armed forces is so powerful that if you were to be able to identify a victim, they victimize you and your entire family and friends and everybody else. So we had difficulty in finding victims, but we knew there were victims because we were receiving reports of these crimes as defined in the Act. And so we then arranged for these witnesses who had come forward, who were actual victims of pellet gun shootings, which Muzammil will deal with. And we had a advocate.
Sorry, the victims were in Kashmir.
Yes, they were victims in Kashmir, and they were now willing to come forward. And we were working through an called Babar Qadri. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
And Babar Qadri was assisting us in coordinating the witness statements. And so when we explained to our SAPS that we were unable to secure the actual presence of these witnesses in South Africa, they had agreed to do it digitally. And Babar Qadri, Advocate Babar Qadri, undertook to assist us. He was assisting us from the start.
Right.
And somehow, I think, unfortunately, we may have been instrumental in utilizing those statements in causing the deaths of these people, because subsequently there was a complete electronic blackout in Kashmir, and we couldn't make the digital connection in the crucial period that Modi was traveling to South Africa. And subsequently, Babar Qadri was killed, assassinated. Two of the witnesses who had given us statements had been killed, and two have disappeared since 2018. We've had no news. So when we heard that Modi was scheduled to travel again, we again went out hunting, looking for these victims, because we knew there was a live docket. And Alhamdulillah, Muzammil was one of the people. So in May of this year, I relodged the docket for an investigation. It took me a few months to get the cooperation of the NDPP, but eventually they gave us a meeting on the 3rd of August. They indicated to us that they were still willing to do digital interviews with these witnesses, but a physical interview would be best. We put word out on the 4th of August, and Alhamdulillah, Muzammil responded, and we managed to bring Muzammil down this week. We spent all of yesterday with the investigating officer at the Hawks offices. We've now provided the statement. I've had a preliminary discussion with the advocate from the National Directorate, Public Prosecutions, who promised to meet with the investigating officer today and hopefully meet us on Monday. So that really is it in a nutshell. It's essentially, we've reported the crime, we followed the Rome Statute in regard to reporting it, and we say, based on what you'll hear from Muzammil, that there were certainly war crimes and crimes against humanity committed. I would like to extend it because the act refers to a genocide, but we just, the evidence required for a genocide is substantial. So we haven't gone with that charge, but certainly what we are witnessing is war crimes, crimes against humanity. And I think from Muzammil's description, you may well see the genocide here, but I think it's a leap we're not yet ready to make, but we certainly believe we have enough evidence factually on war crimes and crimes against humanity.
So if I may comment, there's 2 or 3 takeaways from that very interesting introduction. Thank you. So the first is South Africa has a statute which you referred to as the Rome Statute.
Yes.
And it makes provisions for the prosecution of international crimes.
Yes.
And that's very interesting because it comes on the backdrop of the House of Lords decision in Pinochet back in 1991, which extended this idea of universal jurisdiction for war crimes. The second very important thing is that in the ordinary course, if you compare it to an ordinary crime and the advocates acting for the people as well as the witnesses are taken out, it'll send shockwaves through the community. But here, because it is done by an authority of state, it seems to have less of an impact. And thirdly, I must commend the South African authorities because they appear to have gone out to accommodate witnesses, even if it was electronically, which is quite interesting, digitally or, as you say, through other means. And they're still able to do that, and they're still reaching out. But I think also that you have had the good fortune of having a man like Muzammil Ayub Thakur, who's responded to the call to please come forward. Now, Muzammil, I would, don't want to waste any time. I hand over to you. Please tell us who you are, what your background is, and how you became involved in the discussion that we're having and the actions today.
Thank you for having me. I think I should begin with saying that I'm a regular, normal Kashmiri person from Indian-occupied Kashmir. I come from a family that was exiled. We currently reside in London. A lot of the work that we do is in regards to the liberation of Kashmir, creating more awareness diplomatically, politically, lobbying for the United Nations Security Council resolutions regarding Kashmir to hold a plebiscite, essentially like a referendum, allowing the people to decide their fate. A lot of the work that we do requires getting information from the ground, speaking with members of parliament, going to the United Nations, traveling the world, places like South Africa, and engaging think tanks, intellectuals, lawyers like yourselves, and explaining the situation of Kashmir so that they can facilitate and assist us in various different tasks. One of those tasks, for example, is the Modi docket. I got involved simply because I had some experience. I don't claim to be the most victimized person in Kashmir, but what I can do is at least use the privilege that I have of living in the West to accelerate and accentuate the voices from the ground. Whatever I have seen, if that helps alleviate the suffering of the people of Kashmir and brings us a resolution, particularly towards declaring Narendra Modi and his government as war criminals, then so be it. It is as Yusha mentioned, that it is a risk. Babar Qadri was assassinated because of this. 2 people have been killed and 2 are unheard of. And this is a reality that happens every single day. Not just because of this docket, not just because of the names, but because the Indian authorities have that power, they have impunity in Kashmir, and nobody has the strength or the conviction or even the political will to ask why this is happening, let alone bring about a solution or resolution. So in regards to this docket, it's extremely important because I think this sets a precedent. It is also something that has not been done before, not even by the Kashmiri community, because we don't have that, we don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, we don't have that skill set. So we are extremely thankful for not just Yusha, but the team behind him, and also the people of South Africa that are standing in solidarity with the people of Kashmir, particularly knowing full well what the history of South Africa is in itself.
Time for a break, Muzammil. We'll be back after the break. Please stay tuned. Welcome back, and thank you once again for joining us on not a special broadcast, an ordinary broadcast of Talking Point, but a very, very interesting topic. This time we're going in terms of international law and local law. And as we indicated earlier, we're joined by Muzammil Ayub Thakur. Muzammil, you were just telling us before the break, very, very interestingly, that around the world that you've been with your quest for justice for the Kashmiri people, you happen to find that in South Africa, which must have been quite a surprise.
Of all the places, and we should have thought of it first, considering the history of South Africa, considering the rich heritage that South Africa has in resisting oppression and subjugation. It has been a long time coming, but better late than never. So we're very thankful that we've met many friends in South Africa through Yusha, through many others who have not just allowed someone like myself to feel welcomed, but encouraged. It's a different feeling to know that there are people standing beside you, behind you, and in front of you, willing to take the bullets that are intended for you.
Yusha, I'd like to bring you back here. This is not the first docket, right?
Alhamdulillah,
there's a precedent here.
We've been banging on doors for a while, Ashraf.
Yes,
We've
tell us about some of the other
So
interesting...
we had the initial start was 2008, 2009 in Gaza. Through that docket, we managed to stop a member of the Knesset in occupied Palestine from traveling to South Africa.
Livni, right?
Livni, Tzipi Livni, that's correct. She obviously cancelled and cited other reasons, but we knew the threat of arrest was there because that docket was also allocated. And we know, arising out of the South African Litigation Centre matter, in the matter where they represented the Zimbabweans, that the court held in that matter that the South African police have an obligation to investigate. So it's a real start. And remember, in terms of the statute, South Africa has the obligation to investigate and choose to prosecute or not.
Right.
And if they don't, they have to refer the matter to the ICC. So second stage is, we remain hopeful that they see the injustice, they see the war crime, and they prosecute it because we have sufficient ability to do so. But if that doesn't happen, at least we now go into the second stage. So yes, there's been the Gaza docket. We managed to stop Abdel Fattah al-Sisi from traveling here previously.
So there was also a docket in place.
What we call the Egypt docket.
Right.
And that docket has simultaneously been referred to the African Union as well. Unfortunately, it seems to be gathering moss somewhere because we're just getting complete inaction on the AU. And then most recently, I think it was this Ramadan or last Ramadan with the raids on the Al-Aqsa Masjid, that complaint has been received on the basis that Palestine is now an admitted member of the UN.
Right.
So that complaint we've also lodged, and that's very much alive. We also lodged a docket against Barack Obama when he traveled here for the funeral. And we were quite disappointed at that time with
Yeah.
our government's reaction. But be that as it may, the docket is still there.
Right. Back to you, Muzammil. So here you are in the southern tip of Africa, and you find lawyers involved, and they know what they're doing, and we actually find the domestic law catering for this. So I don't know if you know, but we've had litigation around Putin coming to the BRICS conference, and he's now decided not to come. There was an attempt to arrest a sitting head of state, al-Bashir of Sudan. So, domestically, there seems to be a lot of interest in pursuing this kind of crime. But back to the genesis of this. So we now understand that the local authorities require a victim, live or, crossing over electronically or whatever. They need a witness statement. You've been through a lot. Tell us your story.
The story is no different to any Kashmiri. I think I should say that off the bat. It's a caveat that whatever has happened to me is a drop in the ocean of what happens to the regular people inside Kashmir. They live there. It is their birthplace. It is what they've known from day one. My experience has been that traveling to Kashmir and being stopped at the airport, being interrogated in the typical manner that you often see or can even visualize in the brutality that they performed on myself. And then being harassed in Kashmir.
Your first encounter was 2011, right?
My first encounter with such violence was 2011,
right,
in an Indian airport, no less, while I was traveling to Kashmir to go to a wedding.
Right. And
then being interrogated and the implication that I was a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer. So it started from 2011, excuse me, and it continued while I was in Kashmir, unable to move, unable to travel, constantly under surveillance, pressurized to succumb, running from one house to another, trying to protect myself. Eventually, I was unfortunately captured by the authorities, who treated me in the best way best way they know, as an oppressor does. It was further assaults and torture and beatings,
But you're a UK citizen, right?
Despite being a UK citizen who also has something called an OCI, an Overseas Citizen of India, which essentially made me just as liable to the Indian law as any other Indian did.
Right.
So unfortunately, the British government wouldn't or couldn't intervene. Since then, after that, 2011, the episode there, I was expected to be present in Kashmir whenever they wanted to. But after the 2014 floods, I decided that there was a lot of work to be done in terms of the charitable area in Kashmir. In 2016, one of our leaders, Burhan Wani, was assassinated, which led to massive protests inside Kashmir. During those protests, we often, when we talk about brutalities and human rights abuses, I think those terms do no justice to what actually happens inside Kashmir. I often call it an apocalypse. It is the worst form of abuse that I've ever read about, seen, experienced in my life. And often people talk about conflict zones around the world, and I put to you that all of those conflict zones, all the atrocities that they have faced and continue to face, happens all inside Kashmir. From war crimes to crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide. And I know it's very difficult from a legal point of view in a court of law to justify those things, but the narrations, the evidence that exists, at least from our side, is there. Only, I mean, not necessarily to go all the way back in 1947, but August 2019, Gregory Stanton, who is the head of Genocide Watch, issued an alert stating that genocide is imminent now.
In Kashmir.
In Kashmir. The 10 stages were nearly complete. And that is the reality. So some of the things inside Kashmir that I had to witness was while I was working inside the hospitals and outside the hospitals delivering aid and humanitarian relief, I saw children coming in with pellets. Now, these are tiny little bullets that when they hit the body, they expand and explode into fragmented into tiny little pieces.
So just to be clear, when we speak of pellets, pellet guns here, it's a single shot, that kids used, for their first air gun. This is something quite
This is
drastic.
drastically different.
Yeah.
These explode inside the body. I saw a young boy who had a shrapnel in his heart. These are pellet shrapnels, not gun shrapnels, in his heart. And the doctor said that they couldn't operate on him because it was just far too dangerous. In one of the wards, I saw a girl that had been shot in the abdomen, and the bullet had penetrated all the way into her lower spine. And the doctor said, even if we took out that bullet, we don't know whether she's going to survive, let alone if she's going to be able to walk again. And plus the fact that it had punctured her uterus, so she would never be able to have children.
So, that kind of ammunition is made not to kill you, but it's gonna really disable you.
Exactly, and that's.
And where else in the world would somebody use something like this?
I haven't
It's brutal.
seen the use of such pellets anywhere else in the world. Sometimes we talk about Palestine and the type of weapons that is used there. It's also important to understand that the Zionist regime in that part of the world work closely with the Indian government, and they share technology. They train each other in warfare. I understand that one is an occupation, but so is the other. In Kashmir, it is a military occupation. It is something that is what we call settler colonialism to force demographic change. Exactly what happens in Palestine. They are forcing non-residents to go into those areas so that they can change the demography, the local population. That is what happens inside Kashmir. And the violations, we're talking about mass murder on a scale that is unprecedented. We have so many areas that we refer to as massacres, the Gaukadal massacre, the Chatti Singhpora massacre. We have so many mass graves that have been found in Kashmir. Children being used as human shields. Bullets used on above the weight, which is illegal in war, even in war, extreme war conditions, and this is just a conflict zone. You cannot shoot below the waist unless it is absolutely necessary. In Kashmir, it seems like shooting below the waist is the first resort that the Indian occupational forces have. I've witnessed myself how people that have been shot had their innards spilling out onto the streets, and people having to carry those victims to the hospitals. And while going to the hospital, how the army would stop those victims, stop the attendees from going to the hospital. And even a lot of those people that were protesting and who were showered with bullets and pellets, when we were taking those people to hospital, the army would ransack the hospital looking for those victims because they knew that these were the perpetrators, or these were the people that were protesting on the streets. So not only would they shoot the protesters, they would not allow them medical aid, and then they would enforcibly disappear some of them. Some people we still don't know where they are. But remember, these are children as young as 4 years old. There was an 18-month-old Hibba Nisar. 18-month-old Hibba Nisar, who can barely walk, was sitting in her mother's lap inside her home when she was shot with pellets in her eye. Blinded in one eye.
The
18 months
description
old.
you give is absolutely horrific. And I think, we can only try and imagine what the suffering of those people are. We can't share in that suffering, but it definitely moves you to think, what can we do? And we are absolutely fortunate to have the South African Constitution and other legislation here, which I will be talking to Yusha about this after the break. It's time for a break. Please stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of Talking Point. I'm Ashraf Esop, and I'm joined this evening by the very well-known attorney Yusha Tayob and our guest Muzammil Ayub Thakur. Yusha, just before the break, Muzammil was detailing the kind of weapons and the effects it has, the attack on the doctors and the destruction of the medical services, the keeping away, preventing the victims or the injured from getting. How does that fit in the law? Can you explain to us?
Ashraf, as Muzammil was speaking, I was beginning to wonder if he was the author of the definition section of crimes against humanity and war crimes, because everything he speaks of, murder, enforced disappearances, human shields, all of them are defined under, and just to get to the specific, and as I understood Muzammil over the few days that I've been with him, these pellets enter your body and then explode. So here we go. Employing bullets which expand or flatten easily in the human body, such as bullets with a hard envelope which does not entirely cover the core or is pierced with incision. Employing weapons, projectiles, and material and methods of warfare which are of a nature to cause injury or unnecessary suffering. So they're not designed to kill. They're designed to hurt you in the worst possible way. And this is exactly what he's saying. So if we look at the legislation, and particularly the definition of war crimes and crimes against humanity, we're exactly there. And that's why we make the submissions to our local authorities that that's the act that entitles us to do what we're doing. We have an actual victim. Here's what he says happened. The refusal of medical attention is here. The firing of poisonous gas into enclosed areas is here. Everything he speaks of is here. So we're quite confident that we fall within the ambit of the law. We're certainly confident that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed, and that Modi must take responsibility for it.
So, on that important topic, why are we positing this at the door of Modi? We know that there was a time when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. So, but at what, in terms of chronology, why are we now saying that we're putting this at the door of the sitting head of state?
Because we have a principle in the Act that talks about command line authority, and
Right.
there's an extensive amount of law that pinpoints it to whoever is in charge.
Right.
It gets substantially worse because we know Modi's membership of the RSS and his Hindutva.
Sorry,
plan.
what's RSS?
Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, it is the parent organization of the BJP, the ideological head of the BJP.
And the
many
BJP
affiliates.
stands for?
The Bharatiya Janata Party. So it is
Right.
it is, of course, it is the government right now. The party that is in power is the BJP. The parent organization is the RSS, which essentially created the vision of what the new India should be.
And what is that vision?
The new India is something where they believe they are the superior Aryan race. They believe that they should have one party, one ruler, one nation. If it sounds similar to Nazi Germany, that's because it is. The RSS modeled themselves around Nazi Germany. The salute that the organization has is no different to the Nazis. The uniform they have is no different to the Nazis. And the vision they have is no different to the Nazis of a pan-Hindu nation called Akhand Bharat. Those that believe that Akhand Bharat is a myth should read the literature and listen to, on the news particularly, what these people say. They don't believe that the sovereign borders of India are enough. They want it to expand beyond the subcontinent, all the way to the Middle East and even into Africa. They believe that all of this belongs to a superior Aryan race, which is the Hindustan, India. India is not the yoga, dancing, Bollywood dancing and Gandhi-esque type of India that people are reminiscent of from maybe 50, 60 years ago. This is a modern India that believes in fascism.
Seems to resonate to something that happened around the Second World War.
Something like that, right?
Right.
And it's exactly happening all over again. And people have ignored it. We have warned about it for years. Many people have warned about it for years. One of the visions of Akhand Bharat is to cleanse the lands of those people that do not fall into the category of being Hindus. So if you are non-Hindu, so that means if you are Sikh, Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, or Christian, you should be and will be eliminated. Last Christmas, you should have seen the reports where the Hindutva, which means those people that believe in this ideology, the extremist ideology of Hinduism, they had ransacked Christian churches and destroyed the property and even assaulted those Christians. Just last week, we have seen what's been happening in UP, Uttar Pradesh and Haryana, where masjids are being burnt down, people are being lynched. A boy, his name was Zainuddin, he ran over a rat, a mouse, a little rat. He was booked on charges just because he was a Muslim. essentially you are
What,
guilty
of running over a rat?
Yeah,
Okay.
he ran over not a person,
Yeah.
not an elephant, not a cow that is potentially.
So is there like a list of deities that you have to be like careful of? Ants and
Well, if we make that list, I think in their religion there is close to 350 million. So it would be very difficult to get that list in your pocket or in your iPhone or tablet. But the reality is that it is any excuse to perform crimes on minorities, to keep them under terror, to keep them petrified, or eliminate them completely. It seems that that is the policy. To the extent that we have heard, and this is not written documentation, these are audio confessions where people in the BJP, people part of this party that believe in this ideology, have stated facts such as dig up the bodies of dead Muslim women and do unspeakable things to them. Dig up the dead bodies of Muslim women and do unspeakable things to them. Forcefully marry Kashmiri, in the context of Kashmiri women, forcefully marry them and take their land. And even just a few weeks ago, 11,000 rupees was announced to those people who would forcefully run away with Muslim women. This is the reality of India right now. And Kashmiris have been suffering like this for the last more than 70 years. Kashmir has been used as a laboratory experiment. Those trials have now been exported to mainland India, where now we have seen the minorities in India facing the same experiments or the same abuses that the Kashmiris have faced over 70 years.
There doesn't appear to be too many people shouting out the Kashmiri cause.
That's a good point. It's mainly because the voices are completely silenced. Right. Those people that were working inside Kashmir on a political level, those that were journalists, those that were part of the civil society, Fahad Shah as a journalist, Fahad Shah, Asif Sultan, so many different people, Khurram Parvez in the civil society, our leadership, Qasim Faktu, Masrat Alam, Asya Andrabi, Shabir Shah, all of these people are either in detention or in jail indefinitely with fake charges or no charges whatsoever. 3 of our leaders, political leaders, were killed in detention, what we would call martyrdom. And in the technical term, in the technical legal term, we would say custodial murder. Shaheed Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, Shaheed Ashraf Sahrai, and Shaheed Altaf Shah. People that were denied medical treatment while they were in detention. And remember, people like Gilani, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, was over the age of 90 and had spent nearly half his life in jail or in detention.
So we kind of resonate with that because, up to 1994, we lived under the system called apartheid.
Which is exactly why South Africa should be the second home for Kashmir. The people in South Africa should be standing shoulder to shoulder with us, and they should be inviting us into their homes and into the parliament and into their law offices so that they can understand more about what is happening. They can reflect about their own history and recognize that what they defeated in 1994 is still happening in 2023.
Well, one of the most amazing things is the generosity of the South African Constitution.
Absolutely.
And its treatment of refugees. It's the most admired, obviously abused, but the most admired system in the world. Now, refugees getting to England right now facing all kinds of problems. Those that are there, they want to send them back to, they send them to Rwanda.
Yeah.
Or, some other, they say it's not our problem. But here, South Africa, it's quite amazing. A few months ago, we had Afghani refugee seekers who were hosted by the Americans. And they were brought to our borders and they were let in and they had to, they could apply. So it's quite, what I'm saying is we have a rule of law here, but we have to recognize the efforts of our government, the legislation that is there that makes all of this possible. You sitting here speaking freely without fear about what your experiences are, I'm sure that this is not something you enjoy in other jurisdictions. We're going to be going for a break very shortly, but just before we go, can you just tell us your personal experiences from 2022?
I was charged under the anti-terror law in India. I was stripped of my lifelong access into India because considering that my roots are from Kashmir, I was able to freely travel whenever I wanted. That was stripped from me. That right was stripped from me, and I was charged under the anti-terror law. Every time I have ever done anything for Kashmir, be it in the United Nations, the British Parliament, going to Turkey, whatever it may be, my family have suffered immensely. My cousins have been lifted, they have been taken to the mosques, and they have been tortured under loudspeaker.
Loudspeaker?
Under loudspeaker, so that terror and fear is instilled among the local population, so that they know not to perform such acts. Recently, another cousin has been lodged in jail over the last maybe, I think, 6 weeks now, just because I made a statement in the United Nations. My uncle last year was killed, again, after I made a particular statement on TV. We suffer. All our families suffer. Just because we live outside doesn't mean that our families don't suffer tremendously. But those that live inside Kashmir are, of course, the primary victims of this, what I would like to call genocide and ethnic cleansing.
On that sad note, and very shocking, I mean, I would hate to think what would happen after this interview, to your family, and I don't know what to say, how to protect them. But while you're here and, trying to raise awareness, we have to remember back home the victims that are still to come, Yusha. It's quite shocking. But can we just go for a short break and we'll join after this? Please join us after the break. Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us on Talking Point. As you know, tonight's very important discussion is around Kashmir and the efforts made to bring the injustices of the people there into the public spotlight. We are joined tonight by Attorney Yusha Taib, who is very well known for his involvement in various international dockets, including the Modi docket, and our guest Muzammil Ayub Thakur, who is originally from Kashmir and has now come to South Africa to join us and to try and create an awareness of what is really happening on the ground there, because mainstream media would not carry these stories. Just before the break, he was telling us of the price that people on the ground pay there if they try and get the voices heard and the atrocities known. I've just been told that Kashmir has suffered the longest internet blackout. Muzammil, tell us about that. So there's not only an attack on people physically, on their properties, on the women, on the children, but even their means of communication.
Exactly. It's not even just the means of communication, it's even what you are communicating.
Right.
So having the longest internet shutdown in history anywhere in the world is not a great record to have, but that is exactly what India has done to us.
It's entered the Guinness Book of Records.
Exactly. And for what purpose? To make sure that information does not flow freely from Indian-occupied Kashmir to the rest of the world, so that the world is not aware about the rapes and the enforced disappearances and the mass graves and the human shields and the pellets and the bullets and the cyber cells that exist, the torture centers that exist. They don't want anybody to know about these. But we have brave people that somehow are able to get that information out. Unfortunately, though, that information often comes out very, very late. I'll give you an example for what's been happening over the last 4 years that we had no idea about until very recently. Over the last 4 years, nearly 10,000 women have gone missing from Kashmir. More than 1,000 of those are under the ages of 18.
What's your population?
We have a population of nearly 10 million. Bear in mind that this is not a Kashmiri telling you this is not a Kashmiri journalist telling you this or an academic telling you this. This is from the Home State Minister of India that is telling you that more than 10,000 women have gone missing since 2019.
Without explanation, I mean, gone missing.
Our explanation is that the same way that the Indian government tried to suppress the Khalistan movement in Punjab by using drugs and alcohol, this is a similar approach that we have seen, that there is an influx of drugs and alcohol in Kashmir being forcefully consumed by Kashmiris and then forced to do unspeakable things. This is how you break society, by destroying their children, by destroying their women, by destroying their self-respect and credibility. These are some of the methods that India have used. So when we talk about media blackout, it's specifically to cover these issues, to completely obliterate these issues so that they don't come to the front.
On the flip side, when people come back from India speaking about Kashmir, they talk about the beautiful houseboats and the flowers and the treatment they get, but obviously there's another side that you're not getting to see.
And that is the false mask that India have put on for themselves as well as for Kashmir, showing fake normalcy is completely untrue. During the G20 summit that happened in Kashmir, we know about exactly how India were cleaning the streets in Kashmir, specifically just those areas where the G20 summit was going to happen. They locked up yet again children and boys who maybe, potentially, again, this is policing people's thoughts, potentially would have been protesting. They locked them up in jail or put them in detention. This is exactly what happens in Kashmir. That anybody, thought crime is a real thing. The sanctity that you have in your home or on your mobile, communicating with your loved ones and your friends, even that is monitored. If you say anything that is insidious, what India would consider insidious, you get locked up for thoughts. Something that you text somebody else.
Sure, we knew law. In law, mere thoughts were not punishable, but I've learned something new. Sure, where are we going with this? What is the next step? We understand that you have a docket. It has been filed with the DPCI. It's gone to the National Directorate of Public Prosecution. They studying the docket, or are they taking the next step? And what is the next step?
Okay, so the fact that they hosted us is indicative that they've studied the new docket. So we've had the old docket, which was about 400 or 500 pages,
Right.
and the new docket that's also around the same size. So the reality is that they have studied the docket because they raised a number of questions in the consultation that we were able to answer and point them in the direction. They've now taken a statement from Muzammil because they wanted the witness, the victim. It will now go to the advocate who's employed by the NDPP to advise the policeman. When we left the policeman, and considering that he deals specifically with crimes against the state, he was satisfied himself that he had sufficient information to take that to the next level. The prosecutor will now consider the statement, and if necessary, we'll share this interview with him in regard to Muzammil's evidence, that any of it may have been missed, but we think we've given him enough. He now needs to make a decision. Is he setting up the court as contemplated in the Act to prosecute, or is he onward referring this to the ICC? So either way, we're going to have to deal now with the Rome Act, the obligations of South Africa in terms of that Act, and the ICC if it goes that way. And hopefully, the ideal situation is that we have a decision next week. And so if Modi does arrive here in the following week, that he gets taken in for questioning by the police on account of the fact that there's a live investigation.
So the arrest will be effected by the South African police.
Oh, if all goes well, yes.
Yeah. So is there such a thing as civilian arrest?
There is, but that's a step further if the police don't do what they do, what they have to do. So the idea, we're essentially hoping that the police and the prosecution do what they do.
Right.
Do what they have to do as ordered. We know an investigation has started. We know we've got sufficient grounds on which to do it. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that the sad part of all of this is whenever we raise this, we keep getting told about this concept called political will.
Right.
And it seems like the political will is stymieing everything. So it's sad.
Right.
That's the saddest part about this, because Muzammil referred to it as an outsider. And in fact, the Rome Statute starts with that very preamble, mindful of the atrocities that were committed in the past and our obligations to the future. That's the premise on which the Act is based.
And we have an important judgment of Umar al-Bashir, where the court said that the South African government's failure to arrest him was basically illegal. So it's important. So we have a very important precedent, Muzammil, where there was a sitting head of state, and now we know that recently Putin was also going to come, and there were threats of arrest along exactly the same lines. So it'll be interesting to see how you treat one head of state and how you treat another.
Just to mention on that, there was a DERCO submission at a firm of attorneys in Sandton about 2 weeks ago. And if I recall, it was a Tuesday morning. And the conference was on a Tuesday evening. And on Tuesday morning, the news indicated that Putin would not be traveling to South Africa. And on the Tuesday evening, I attended a seminar at the firm in which Zain Dango from DIRCO, Department of International, said that if he had come, they would have been obliged to arrest. So
there's no
very important once we get this investigation properly completed.
Yeah, I think that's very important because DIRCO is an arm of, it's international relations, so it's a ministry, and the ministry is cognizant of the responsibilities of another department or another ministry and says, you had to do your job, and if you do, there's nothing we can do about this. So it's interesting how this thing is unfolding now. And I must say, on one level, I mean, you could almost make a movie about this, and to see the drama, because I mean, there's a sense of urgency that grips you here that says, listen, this is real life. This is not something that you made up. This is what has happened. Here's a real victim. His family has suffered. They continue to suffer. In fact, he might be sitting here, and some other terrible thing could happen there. And here you are in the southern tip of Africa, finding lawyers and legislation that supports you and helping you along the way. I mean, it's real, it's encouraging in that way. And I must say, I have to commend the South African authorities for the consistency that they've displayed since Umar al-Bashir. And I thought that the Bashir judgment would have been very interesting for us if it was carried out, because that would have been a real live issue being played out. And then we know the DA took the Putin matter to court, and I mean, they followed that route. And I think Putin himself must have been advised, by whoever, that look, it's not worth the risk. And he's setting, I mean, in a BRICS agreement where all heads of state, he's not here. So that's pretty serious. Then from the BRICS point of view, a lot more people wanting to join. There are now 49 other states all coming. So very interesting times we're living. Yusha, your parting words, and then in 30 seconds, and then I'll hand over to Zamil.
So Ashraf, the legislation is there. As much as you commend the South African authorities on it, they now need to act in terms of it, and I'd like to see that. I mean, from what you've heard, and the definitions of crimes against humanity and war crimes, we certainly meet the requirements. And I'm just hopeful that the search for justice trumps political will, inshallah.
Inshallah. I mean, and I think just taking from where Mr. Dango is speaking, he says they would have been obliged. So I can't see that, you can't, one size fits all. Muzammil?
I also hope that political will is not going to be a stumbling block. I think that the people of South Africa, it is still fresh in their minds what they had to go through, the pains they had to go through to achieve what they have today. And we aspire for the same thing. All we are asking are for our basic rights, the same rights that everybody else has across the world. And of course, importantly, to protect our identity. I don't think anybody would be happy that an outsider, an alien invader, is going to strip you of your identity and impose upon you what they deem fit and acceptable. So I pray that the South African people, the South African government, the people that are working on this docket, the prosecutors, that they have an understanding that there is a responsibility on them to make sure that whatever they do in regards to Kashmir is going to be a reference point in the future for so many other places and so many other causes as well. It is going to put South Africa on the map even more so than it has been in the past. You have a rich history and heritage and culture of resistance, and particularly against oppressive regimes and oppressive peoples, and of course working towards people like for the Palestinians, the way that the lawyers have worked in regards to the, as you mentioned, the Bashar, Egypt. Now it's the time for Kashmir. And we hope that this will be a turning point in our struggle for the right to self-determination.
Well, we still have a journey because the ICC has been accused of being Afrophobic, that the ones that are there have been usually from Africa. But that's another topic for another day. Thank you very much for your efforts and joining us here. We wish you all the best. And to our viewers at home, thank you very much for joining us on Talking Point. And we hope to see you very soon. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.